We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's February 13th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dain-hong.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday. And Young Sang-yeok.
Thanks for having me again.
All right. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. The Tokushima Prefecture in Japan is under scathing criticism for purchasing an extremely expensive sex doll to promote the city's tourism. The government's tourism division said it paid around $3,000 for this doll to be displayed at their airport. Auditors have since criticized the prefecture for going against social norms and asked them to seek compensation from the responsible officials. The prefecture had claimed that the sex doll was more effective than regular mannequins as a way to draw in more tourists. Moving on, we're just coming back from the Lunar New Year. Officials have found the number of police reports this year come down by 6.7% compared to 2023. The amount of car accidents also came down by 41.1% compared to last year as well. Police have made clear that they would dispatch enough personnel to prevent any crimes or accidents from happening during this period. And lastly, ever since the Korean government has decided to tackle its medical personnel shortage by expanding the number of eligible medical students, the country's doctors have been threatening to go on a nationwide strike, specifically from today. This hasn't swayed the presidential office, though. The top office on Monday said they would not retract their latest decision because it seems like the only plausible way to solve the shortage of doctors in rural areas amid an aging population. And for the first time in 19 years, officials have raised the medical school admission cap by an extra 2,000 students. This means from next year, a total of 5,038 students will be able to enroll in medical school. Officials believe this is still not enough, given that we are seeing a rapidly aging society. But here in the studio, what do you guys think about this latest measure? And we are seeing ongoing tensions between doctors, their associations, and officials. What are your thoughts on that?
So I understand the government's intention to increase the number of doctors to respond to the upcoming aging society, but it's my wonder whether that would actually solve the issues at all, because even today, many medical school graduates prefer to go to financially promising departments like dermatology or plastic surgery rather than internal medicine or surgeries where we only need the doctors. And also many doctors usually work in metropolitan areas rather than rural sites. So I think rather than just increasing the cap of the headcounts, I think it's really important to equally distribute the number of medical staffs to each different fields and give more incentives to the doctors who volunteer to work in rural areas.
Exactly. Sang-yeok, you made a very compelling argument there, and that's a lot of what the public is thinking as well. Even on NewsGen, we covered back a few months ago when we did street interviews, a lot of people said the more critical problem is making sure that we have enough doctors at rural areas where we're seeing a shortage, and also in specific divisions of medical departments. Now, what about you, Cheska? What do you think about this ongoing tug of war between doctors' associations and the government?
You know, as a citizen of South Korea, more than anything, I would wish for both a patient like myself and the medical practitioner to reach a happy middle ground. But one thing that I'm torn about is that, at least according to the local news and the polls that have been surveyed by the people, overwhelming number of people do want an increase of, medical, people in the medical school. However, there's just as equally strong force of medical practitioners that we find a happy middle ground, because let's face it, healthcare is the fundamental to a very strong country. And it is a bit saddening that there is a conflict and difference in opinion between the two parties, I suppose,
But that discrepancy shouldn't stop us from not tackling this problem.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly why the top office says now it's not the time to retract any measure. So we'll have to see whether this nationwide strike would happen and what type of consequences it can bring forth. But in the meantime, let's now switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day, digital nomads. It refers to people who travel freely while working remotely, all thanks to digital devices. And since COVID-19, we've seen a growing number of companies allow their employees to work from home, which has naturally opened the gateway for people to become digital nomads or aspire to become one. So here in the studio, have you two ever heard about this term digital nomads, and what do you think about them?
It's a very popular trending term in our generation, and Sang-yeok and I, we can both talk about it. But one of the things is that the number has definitely significantly increased since COVID. And I know this from my very personal own experience because remote working sort of became a norm or part of the option. And I personally had to negotiate very heavily to allow for flexibility in my work locations because for someone like me, it honestly increased my work productivity and efficiency by probably more because I'm taking on much more projects than I did before. So I classify myself as a semi-nomad, a combination of nomadic work life plus an office life for specific projects and meetings. But there are so many YouTubers, programmers, web designers that have so many areas that are now becoming fully or even like part-time nomads like myself. So it can be incredibly effective for people who have more than one projects or jobs. And also they don't have to travel to the offices as much.
Exactly. So we are seeing a surge of digital nomads, especially since COVID-19. And Sang-Yo, are you a digital nomad yourself? And what do you think about this growing trend?
So even before the COVID-19, freelance interpreters and translators like me were already used to these kind of work patterns. So for interpretation, I usually go to certain venues, and once I finish my work, I can just return to my home. And there are often cases where I have to do remote interpretation in my room, which is more convenient than the actual on-site interpreting. And I think the translation is more fitting to the ultimate definition of digital nomad. I can do my translation if I have wireless internet and my laptop whenever and wherever I want. And I don't have to be worried about my boss, and I don't have to commute to a certain place or work. So it's really convenient. And if I ask my fellow interpreters and translators who work as a freelancer, they're all satisfied with their current lifestyle. And I'm also really enjoying this work patterns because I can use my time flexibly and freely.
I think it all comes down to convenience and
Right.
not being tied down to any physical location. And because of that, digital nomads, the concept itself has become extremely popular among our generation. But Cheska, are there any stats to back this claim up? How many digital nomads are we seeing? And how much of people from our generation are trying to become one?
And I was particularly curious too, because after COVID, I was quite sure that the number has surged. So I was also curious how much of our folks are out there. So let's take a look at the screen to find out. So according to Forbes, back in 2019, we had about a total of 11 million nomad folks around the globe. Now that almost tripled in the next 3 years, coming up to 2020 during and after COVID. And with this momentum, the projected number in the next decade is to reach about 1 billion worldwide. And Forbes did add that there's much higher propensity in Gen Z and our generation to become digital nomads, as they will also be the future workforce. Thus, I think that's why there is a such high projected cost and forecast of digital nomads in the future. Now, one interesting thing I found from the article was that an overwhelming 80% of digital nomads expressed happiness not only in their lifestyle, but also in income.
Right.
I feel like I'm a public announcement
Okay.
for
Wow.
digital nomads.
You're really promoting it
I
out
know,
there.
I'm like, come on, people, sign up. The sign link is right there. But as we will discuss this a bit further, one particular reason is what's called a geographic arbitrage.
Right.
Meaning they don't have to live in the city or the very they can actually separate
Right.
the living quarters with the work. As you know, Seoul City, there are so many expensive rent areas.
Exactly.
As you get closer to the metropolitan. So many young people have to spend an exorbitant amount to pay taxes and rents in this very popular city. And I did the same when I was living in New York. But now, because they're not tied to these locations, they can alleviate their cost as a starting young professional and save up that to maybe buy a house,
Right.
maybe travel a bit more. So it offers, I guess, a bit more happiness.
A bit more happiness and a lot more liberty.
Yeah,
And I think because our generation is so used to the concept of being a global citizen, we're no longer tied down to the concept of having to stay in your hometown forever and ever. You can just travel about, actually work in your dream city and then change it in a few months. Now, we asked our viewers what they think about digital nomads themselves. Here's what 3 of them had to say. Let's start with User. User said, living my life as a digital nomad may give me many opportunities and flexibility, but I love stability and am not an adventurous person. I love my friends and family here. Leon Teo said, I admire the freedom and flexibility associated with the digital nomad lifestyle, but I do think it is often romanticized on social media, overlooking the challenges and realities like income stability, instability, visa issues, and social isolation. Tasmia said, it is my dream to work as a digital nomad because I don't need to talk to anyone in real life, just the people from the internet, and it boosts my confidence. Now, as our
I love these comments.
Exactly. I think they did a great job in really encapsulating what the pros and cons are. But as digital nomads yourselves,
Yes.
I think you guys could better relate to what the pros and cons are,
Right.
especially you, Cheska, because you've not only been a digital nomad, but you've also worked in the office before.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
based on your experience, could you really categorize the pros and cons of being a digital nomad?
I think I can very much do that for you. And I would just want to add that Leon, I think, nailed it perfectly when it comes to when it comes to pros and cons.
Right.
But one of the greatest benefits of obviously being a digital nomad is flexibility and efficiency. So also when it comes to digital nomad, I think one of the things that you have to be very careful about is that you have to be your own time manager.
So true.
So when you're not being accountable for the time that you're spending on your project or your work, you can have 365 days of being unemployed and be on vacation and not make a single dime. I'm just going to be really honest out there. But if you're super productive and if you really become your best boss, then you can be working 365 days around the clock, where someone like me who gets an office 3 minutes away from her house so she can save every single minute of her time to pour into the project and work. It's really about a balance and how disciplined you are to enjoy that freedom that is given to you.
And you mentioned discipline. I also think it has to do with the company as well. Given that you're a freelance digital nomad, I think it comes down to your self-discipline. But for companies that are promoting this, I think it comes down to their regulations and whether they have enough policies to boost productivity while ensuring that the digital nomad is working and happy at the same time. Now, as a digital nomad who's done a lot of interpretation and translation, what would you think are the pros and cons?
Well, like Cheska mentioned, managing your time without restriction is the biggest advantage of digital nomads. And usually jobs like these have a wage system based on your performance rather than the working hours. So you can make much money as you want, depending on your accomplishments, which is, I think, is a good thing if you're really productive and you're workaholic. So, but there are downsides as well when it comes to being a digital nomad. So because there's no clear hours, there might be less work-life balance compared to what you actually think that digital nomads would have. And also because digital nomads, you have to always respond to the calls from your clients, which means that if you miss an opportunity, then the chances are that you will fall behind the competition and that opportunity will go to others. Yes.
So you have to be on your phone 24/7.
I missed a call from my client and it was like a 5 minutes delay and I missed this very lucrative opportunity. It was really depressing.
But you were
actually.
only out for 5 minutes.
Right. So, but the thing is that the competition is really fierce, and others will obviously take away your chance. And by the way, when I go to shower, I always take my smartphone just in case I don't miss any calls from my clients.
Oh my gosh! So that experience actually has pushed you to bring
It was
your
really
phone
traumatizing.
inside the shower because you lost that opportunity.
See how traumatizing and scary digital nomads can be?
Exactly. So I do agree with our viewers' comments that the concept of digital nomad could be a bit romanticized, but to find out better about what the pros and cons are, we're now going to include another fellow millennial digital nomad in our talks. Stay tuned for our live interview. We're now going to include a fellow Gen Z who's been working as a digital nomad. It's Chi Bei. Welcome, Chi.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
All right. So, Chi, we've been going around and talking about the concept of digital nomad. Both of our panelists here in the studio are digital nomads. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself as to what you're doing as a digital nomad and how long it's been?
So I'm a web developer. So it's been a little bit more than 5 years since I started working as digital nomad. Yeah.
And how'd you become one?
Oh, well, I've always had the idea of trying out the lifestyle, but I actually began my first digital nomad experience in 2019. And then after the pandemic started. So the concept of remote work became increasingly popular despite the travel restrictions. And with more and more people transitioning to remote work or working from home, it made sense for me to explore the possibility as well.
So,
And
yeah.
I chose a few cities that I always um, have been curious about and packed my life into a single suitcase and headed off for a couple weeks in Spain. Yeah, that's how I started my first journey.
You were basically a pioneer for digital nomads even before the pandemic. Now,
Yeah,
Jessica,
I know that there are romanticized version of the style. Could you tell us what it's like to actually be a digital nomad? Maybe give us one pro and one con based on your life experiences.
Yeah, being a digital nomad is these days very romanticized, but in reality, it's a very similar journey to being an immigrant in a new place. So you choose a city or a country you don't want to live and work from, and you experience the same struggles and joys of adapting to a new environment. So I think the key difference is that you sustain yourself financially through the work. Sometimes it can be very tiring to constantly move to new places, make new friends, and let go of past connections. But the journey offers invaluable opportunities to learn about different cultures and to really learn about yourself. So it's a lifestyle that makes you feel free from being tied down to a single place, and it really allows you to explore the world.
Okay, so G, I can imagine there may be quite a few distractions as you work as a digital nomad. So any personal tips as to staying productive and always focused?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Cheska mentioned it earlier too, but these distraction can be very challenging, especially when you live and work in really tourist heavy places. So my personal tip would be to avoid like busy cities, so you don't get swayed by the touristy atmosphere. I think it's all work and fun, and along the same lines, I make an effort to separate my work and living spaces. So personally, I find that having access to co-working spaces is very useful for both my productivity and for social aspects. Also, establishing set work hours, making your own daily routines can really help you disconnect from work, and so that you can make time and energy to enjoy the local social life. Yeah.
and see if I may, nomads like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's nice to see other nomad folks when you travel, and you can share like the similar experiences it's nice to see other, let's say, Koreans doing the same thing, and yeah, it's great. Yeah.
All right, so hopefully this digital nomad culture will continue, but the romanticized versions need to be sent to the public in order for them not to have the wrong image before, stepping in. But thank you so much, G. It was a pleasure hearing from you today and your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and we're going to end off with what we just asked Chi. How would you guys like to see this digital nomad culture evolve from now on? And as we mentioned, I don't think it's for everyone, right? Advice or precautionary measures that people should put into mind before actually deciding to become a digital nomad.
Before I mentioned, after a discussion, what are your thoughts on digital nomads?
This is actually something that I've been contemplating for a while, because as a reporter, I have actually reported on workation, and I thought that concept was amazing.
It's exciting.
I know. I would be like, you're on vacation, but you're working. Wouldn't you be able to balance it out? But then I reflected back to everyone, nor do I want to push it. But what about you?
I'm so glad you mentioned it because
Mm.
of not being a digital nomad. But one thing that I go by, a quote that I go, absolutely discipline.
That's so
So
true.
people only look at the one side. When we talk about work-life balance, if you're not carefully managing every single minute of your time, there's a work-life blur. So I would like to, kind of mention to all those digital nomad out there that they carefully evaluate their own self